Good morning. Welcome back to Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak. Today we are in chapter 3. All right. And it's called When Way Closes. And just to remind you of what last week was us trying to live authentic lives and us listening to our life, trying to listen to what God had called us to do, listening for the gifts that we've been given, paying attention. Okay, listening to your life, paying attention to it. Trying not to tell your life what you were going to do with it, but trying to let your life tell you what you were going to do. Let God's gifts and God's Spirit speak to you. Well, this chapter has one of those few stories that I told you about that are just priceless. They are perfect stories told in a perfect way. Parker has... He's having some trouble discerning what God's will is and how to move forward. And so I'm picking up on page 38. If I were ever to discover a new direction, I thought it would be at Pendle Hill, which was a retreat center that the Quakers owned. A community rooted in prayer, study, and a vision of human possibilities. But when I arrived and started sharing my vocational quandary, people responded with the traditional Quaker counsel. And despite their good intentions, it left me even more discouraged. They would say, have faith. A way will open. And that was their saying. A way will open. I have faith, I thought to myself. What I don't have is time to wait for way to open. I'm approaching middle age at warp speed, and I have yet to find a vocational path that feels right. The only way that's open so far has been the wrong way. After a few months of deepening frustration, I took my troubles to an older Quaker woman, well known for her thoughtfulness and candor. Ruth, people keep telling me that way will open. Well, I sit here in silence. I pray. I listen for my calling, but way has not opened. I've been trying to find my vocation for a long time, and I still don't have the foggiest idea what I'm meant to do. Way may open for others, but it's not opening for me. Ruth's reply was a model of Quaker plain speaking. I'm a birthright friend, which is a way of saying she was a Quaker from the cradle. And in my 60-plus years of living, way has never opened in front of me. Then she paused. And I started sinking into despair. Was this wise woman telling me that the Quaker concept of God's guidance was a hoax? Then she spoke again, and this time with a grin. But a lot of way has closed behind me, and that's had the same guiding effect. Now that's profound. The way doesn't necessarily open in front of you as much as certain things close behind you, giving you the firm belief that the way forward is this way because the other ways have all been blocked. There are so many biblical stories that are perfect analogies for this. I just don't have time for all of them. I just concentrate on a couple. You have the Joseph story. Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery. He goes first to the home of Potiphar. Well, I think you know that story pretty well. He's falsely accused and thrown into jail. And in jail, he's also ignored. And his insight and his understanding is just ignored and paid no attention to. So these ways, he certainly had a way he wanted to live his life, didn't he? It wouldn't have been in jail, wouldn't have been falsely being accused of something, but that's exactly where he ended up. He ended up down a path that was not the path he would have chosen, but the way was closing behind him to the point that he becomes aware that there's only one path left, and it's the perfect path. He was the perfect path. He was the perfect man to help the Egyptians and the Hebrews during this time of famine. He was the perfect one. He was God's messenger. So, his life, his gifts, was speaking. He had heard the voice. He had heard the vocatio. He had felt the calling. But it wasn't because a path opened. It was because so many other paths closed, giving him limited options. Then, of course, there's Paul. Paul desperately wanted to go see the Romans. It's Romans 1, and I think maybe again in Romans 13, or maybe it's Romans 15, where Paul says something to the effect of, listen, I desperately wanted to come see you, but I was prevented from doing so. Something got in his way and kept Paul from going. Now, did Paul see that as the obstacle? Most of us would have seen it as an obstacle. Most of us would have seen that as reason to sit down and not use our calling. But the way Paul saw it is, yes, I can't go to Rome, but I can go to Macedonia. That's the way that's opened. This way closed, but that doesn't mean God has stopped working. Maybe God's in the closing. Maybe the opening is where I need to turn my life to now. And he went to Macedonia, and he had a great ministry. And eventually, he turns his attention to the Romans, and he obviously writes this letter. So, if we think about it, there's much to think about in the way closing. Parker writes, as Ruth taught me, there is much guidance in way that closes behind us, as there is in the way that opens ahead of us. The opening may reveal our potentials, while the closings may reveal our limits, two sides of the same coin, the coin called identity. In the spiritual domain, identity is coin of the realm, and we can learn much about our identity by examining either side of the coin, the ways opened or the ways closed. As often happens on the spiritual journey, we have arrived at the heart of the paradox. Each time a door closes, the rest of the world is open. All we need to do is stop pounding on the door that just closed and turn around, which puts the door behind us and welcomes the largeness of life that now lies open to our souls. The door that closed kept us from entering a room, but what now lies before us is the rest of reality. Think about it like that. That's a beautiful way of looking at the closed door. Just turn around. The world's wide open behind you. Now, I think about the various ways in which doors close on us. Things that we anticipated working out, things that we thought were the right path that just didn't. Make a list of them. Let's start. Well, divorce. Divorce happens. You didn't think it would, but that's a door that closes. The plant closes, or your job is eliminated. Not something you planned on, but it's a door closing. Possibly retirement. You're choosing to close that door. You've worked hard enough. You've worked long enough. You're ready to retire. Door closes. Maybe you move away. You move to another part of the country or another part of the world maybe, but you have to transition from where you've lived a lot of your life. Now you go ahead. Write down other ways in which ways close. I mean, we just lived through COVID-19, and COVID-19 is a way that brought some closing. Could your vocation, could my vocation, could the voice of God, the vocatio, could that calling be intensified after recognizing these closings? In fact, I think it's heightened. When a person has to go through a divorce, they really do begin to reassess their life, reassess their values, reassess their decisions. And they oftentimes don't just go through it, they grow through it. They become better people on the other side of it. And so that is listening to your life. That is listening to the experiences that you've had to live through and processing them through the lens of God's grace and God's calling. Now, we are through chapter 3, and we have 3 chapters left. And I'm stopping this one at about 10 minutes. So next week, we might have to go to about 20 to get it all done. But we'll do the last 3 chapters of Let Your Life Speak next week. See you then.